Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our next panel for day one, our final panel for today. This is the marketplace perspective. We just heard from the applicant perspective, and now we're going to hear from the marketplace perspective, adjusting to change. Today's moderator is Mary Sbarmak. She's the Senior Vice President of Governmental and External Affairs at Smoker Friendly. Mary is a longtime friend of TMA, as is Smoker Friendly, and we're very happy that she has agreed to lend her expertise and assemble together just an absolutely fantastic panel of experts to take us from where the manufacturers looked at it as the applicants into more of the retail world and wholesale world, which is where these products are actually getting into the hands of the consumers, and they're also dealing with the consumer feedback on many of the issues that we've talked about. So Mary, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you and your panel. I will pop on at the end to manage the audience questions. Mary, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chris. We do have a great panel today, and I think you'll find our marketplace perspective and our adjusting to change will be interesting. I think we're probably, as a group, a little more on the practical side than what we've seen, certainly from the director and from the previous panel, because we're really reporting on and getting product to the end user. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. First of all, I have Don Burke. Don is with Management Science Association. He's the vice president or senior vice president there. And Don is going to give us an update today on what's going on, trends with all different types of tobacco and nicotine products and sales data. So we'll start with Don, and then we're going to move on to Tom Bryant, who is the executive director and legal counsel for NATO, which is the National Association of Tobacco Outlets. Obviously a great friend to our industry. Tom is a tireless worker on legislative issues at all levels, federal, state, and local, and really helps retailers and wholesalers and manufacturers, albeit a retail organization. He helps all of the different channels that get tobacco to the end user. And then last, but certainly not least, I have Amanda Wheeler, and she is the president of the American Vapor Manufacturers Association, and also owns and operates a store of her own. So after we go through Don's presentation and Tom's presentation, we're going to switch over to Amanda, and she's going to have some comments, I'm sure, on vape in particular and the manufacturing of vape and kind of what's happening there. And then really to talk a little bit more about the end user and some of the challenges we as retailers have in with all of the different levels, whether it be the CTP, whether it be manufacturers, but trying to get good products to our end users. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Don and we'll get started.
Thank you, Mary. Happy to be here today. I'll be showing you trends in both the nicotine category by product, and then also what happened during the pandemic. So not only sort of what's happening today, but what did we see that's happening during the pandemic, and how is that influencing results we're seeing today for the tobacco items? So I think they're going to send me a link to share my screen here. So, and then I will show you the slide. So hold on one second. Chris, do you want to send me that link, please? Just share the screen. I'm not seeing that at the moment. There we go.
Coming your way.
Yep, I see it. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are, Don. You can bring up
okay, so you should see the presentation now. Okay. All right, guys, so we'll get started. We'll look at what's happening within the US on these nicotine trends. First of all, just a legal disclaimer. This is not meant to say anything about one tobacco manufacturer's business. It is meant to look at the tobacco industry from a retailer perspective and see what is really happening in the marketplace. We'll look at about 300,000 stores across the US. We dotted all of those here in this. So it's quite an extensive database that we're managing. We're looking at distributor to shipment retail data. In many cases, that's important because a lot of the convenience stores and some tobacco outlets that do not collect their data, and therefore it's very difficult to get a clean read. That's what we'll be showing you today, though. By using distributor shipments into that store, we'll get a very clean read of those stores. First slide I want to show you is what's happening across the US. And what this slide really shows you is the pie chart on the left. It says percentage of stores. That's showing that the blue pie slice is showing you that 59% of all the stores in the US are convenience gas. Interestingly, with the pandemic, that's gone up a little bit. So many stores and other classes of trade have declined. In the convenience channel, because they were considered essential businesses, most parts of the US, they managed to survive. And in fact, now are a larger percentage of stores in the US. In fact, by far, the largest percentage of stores in the US are convenience stores. 71%, now this is a pie chart on the right, 71% of tobacco volume goes through convenience stores. So a huge amount of tobacco volume is going through those stores. In terms of tobacco outlet, the dark orange slice of the pie, 4% of all stores in the US, yet 8% of the tobacco business. The one other channel that I will call out is the dollar store. Now up to 10% of all stores in the US, yet still only accounting for about 2% of tobacco sales. So let's look at what's happening. Let's look at the column on the left across all outlets. Consumer units we'll look at first, that first number, which shows 0.1%. What this is showing is that basically in terms of consumer units are defined as items through a cash register. So a pack of cigarettes counts as one, a 3-pack of cigarillo counts as one, a tin of moist counts as one. Just units to the cash register. We see that in general, things are actually flat, which for the tobacco industry is not bad. We typically see 2 to 3% decline a year based on what's been happening the past several years. Right now, we're seeing it's pretty flat. That's good news. You can see in convenience, it's doing well. Tobacco outlets are up by 5.1% in terms of consumer units. That's because in many cases, many tobacco outlets during the pandemic either closed, shut down their hours, or were not shopped as frequently. So their business today looks far stronger because many of them were closed in the previous year. And that's the reason that's up by 5.1%. I want to call your attention now to the second line, which are servings. Servings are one consumer usage occasion. So the smoking of one cigarette, the pinch of one amount of moist, that type of thing, the smoking of one cigarillo. That's a serving. So we're equivalizing the volume. We can see in this case that across all outlets, it's down by about 1.7%. In convenience gas, however, not as bad, down by only 1%, and tobacco outlets are up just slightly over 1%. So some interesting results there in terms of servings. I'll show you more about servings here on this slide. So this is showing share of the category and trying to give you a feel for currently how are consumers, when they choose to consume nicotine, what product are they using? So look at the middle column, third quarter 2021. The first column is third quarter 2020. You can see in 77% of the cases in 2021, consumers who choose to use nicotine are smoking a cigarette. That's down by 1.5 points. What's up? Vapor is up. And I'm not sure that many people yet in the industry realize that vapor is having a fairly strong year and is recovering rather nicely from a decline in the earlier 12-month period, but doing pretty well this year, up by 1.2 points. Large cigars, which are defined as cigarillos, are up a little bit as well, but I've got some interesting results on large cigars I'll show you in a minute. Modern oral, those small nicotine pouches that do not contain tobacco, also called tobacco-derived nicotine. Number one item in modern oral is a product called Zyn. That's up by 0.7%, one of the fastest growing categories in the tobacco field. Okay, consumer units, again, the items that you retailers would be seeing going through your cash register, 61% of the time that a tobacco product goes through your cash register, it's a cigarette. Large cigars moves up quite heavily here, up to about almost a quarter of the time, you're putting a cigarillo through your cash register. Moist is next, and you can see how the others fall. Again, the same items are growing. Large cigars growing, paper tube wraps growing, vapor growing, modern oral growing. Let's look at total nicotine trends. In 2021, we're predicting about a decline to maybe 1 to 2%. So not a bad decline, but in 2020, given that many consumers were working from home rather than being in the workplace where they faced restrictions on the use of tobacco, they actually consumed quite a bit more. And we saw a very strong year in 2020 for tobacco, up 2.5%. This year, we're expecting, so there was some, in the beginning of the year, some carryover of people continuing to work from home. That's getting back to more normal situations now. We're still predicting this year, not a bad year, at -1% to -2%. 2022, we're not seeing a bad year either, probably similar results to this year, anywhere from 0, a flat year, to -2% for a nicotine trend. So we're expecting this year and next year to be not so bad for the US nicotine industry. Okay, where are cigarettes going? Cigarettes are really interesting. Right now, we're projecting for 2021 a -5.5 to -6% type decline. Last year, it was only -1.8%. Now, the reason it's so great this year is because last year was a stronger than usual year. So when you put that in the base and you compare it to this year doesn't look as good. Next year, we're predicting -4% to -5% in 2022, a return to more normal cigarette consumption. Cigarettes, actually, if you think about it, are not doing too badly. Currently this year, we have about a 7% increase in pricing. Usually each year, it's about a 4%. So a stronger increase in pricing this year than we've seen in the past, as well as the continuation of the work from home, other factors that are contributing to it, as we call it here, the COVID situation, 21 over restriction, all of that facing cigarettes, not such a bad year when you consider the factors of a good base year and the price increase. Okay, so where are the trends in cigarettes going? Right now, we're seeing -3.3% for the most recent 52 weeks across all outlets for cigarettes. I want to call your attention to the two numbers below that 3.3%. Menthol is down by 3.6%, non-menthol down by 3.2%. First time we're seeing that menthol is taking a greater hit than non-menthol cigarettes. We believe that's because of the menthol restrictions that are in place across the country. We're starting to see them take hold, and this is having an impact on the business. Tobacco outlets obviously up because of the poor base where many of them were closed in 2020. Okay, where's oral going? Oral would be any item a consumer puts in their mouth to consume nicotine. So that's moist, snus, and modern oral. This year, we're seeing it being up about 4 to 5%. Last year, it was up 6.6%. Next year, flat to about 3% increase. Modern oral, that category is driving this increase. Where's cigars going? Large cigars, which are defined as cigarillos, up about 6.6% the past 52 weeks. I've got some interesting results to show you in a minute for the most recent quarter. But from a year perspective, the last 52 weeks, large cigars up 6.6%. I will tell you, the last time I presented this, it was up about 12%. So it's declined somewhat, but still growing over the past 52 weeks. Little filtered cigars, those are little cigars that are smoked like a cigarette. They typically come in packs of 20. They typically have a filter, that type of thing. They have been declining for several years now, down about 12%. Where's moist going? We had a really good year in 2020 with moist. It was up 1.2%. Again, very few restrictions when a person's working from home, so they're able to use the product as they wish. This year, with more people returning to work, we're seeing a decline of -2 to -3. That's also impacted by the growth of modern oral. 2022, we're projecting not a bad year, -1 to -2% for moist. Here's vapor, and vapor has some interesting results. Let's look at the column on the left at the top, the volume levels. For cartridges, we're up by 18.5%. I will tell you this, over the past 19 going into 20, we're seeing some declines in vapor. We are not seeing that today. And in fact, this has improved. One of the things to keep in mind is at the end of 2019 was a legal THC vaping crisis that turned a lot of people off to vapor, even though it was only an illegal product that caused the issues. No legitimate product caused any problems. However, it turned consumers off to vaping. It's about a year now since that occurred, over a year and a half now, heading into 2 years. So because of that, consumers are starting to forget. Vapor is coming back. Cartridges up 18.5%. Disposables, because of they're allowed to have flavors in disposables as compared to the cartridges, up by 28.9%. I don't think anybody would have predicted that prior to this flavor situation. Kits are up a little bit as well. You can see tobacco outlets doing very well, again, because of the bad base year that we're seeing for tobacco outlets. But vapor is doing very well so far the past 52 weeks. Here's where we're projecting vapor will go. So 2021, we're seeing about a 10% to 15% increase. Next year, about 0 to 5%, we expect that growth to continue. Keep in mind, in 2020, we saw a decline of 5.6%. So not bad results for vapor. Let's look at the nicotine categories. We're finding that cigarettes for the most recent quarter now are down by 7.5%. This first time I'm showing this as well. All other tobacco, which has usually been growing, is declining now by minus 1.8%. That decline is really attributable to two categories: large cigars, which are cigarillos, and also moist. And I'll show you in a minute the most recent quarter results for those two items. First time ever we're seeing, though, that large cigars for about 5-6 quarters has declined, and moist typically is usually flat to a small decline, and we're seeing about a 6% decline. I'll show you that in a minute. But they're driving this change in this category. Here's cigarettes, first of all. So when I break it down by the sub-segments, we see super premium declining by 3.9%, premium declining by 7.1%, discount declining by 16.9%, and deep discount growing by 1%. Deep discount has been growing the past several years, and with the impact on the economy and COVID and everything else, deep discount has been growing. In many cases, when consumers got their stimulus checks, many of those that used to roll their own decided to purchase a deep discount, a pre-made deep discount brand. Some consumers who are buying the more premium products have moved to the deep premium or discount, have moved to deep discount. So it's really contributed to a growth in deep discount category. And this is a trend that's been happening over the past several years. Okay, let's look at modern oral. In 2021, we're projecting growth of 75% to 80%. It was 160% in 2020. What we're seeing with modern oral is that most convenience stores today are carrying modern oral. So we're not seeing quite the distribution builds that we have seen in the past. Because of that, for 2022, we're projecting a very nice growth rate, but not anywhere near as strong as in the past, of 10% to 20%. I'll show you more on that in just a minute. Now, here's modern oral looking at it by quarterly volume. And we're looking at it across all trade on the left, and then convenience gas, tobacco outlets, drug, all of the trade. The height of the bar represents the size of the business. So you can see very clearly that modern oral today is really a convenience gas item and grew 6% in the most recent third quarter of 2021, up 8% in tobacco outlets, but a far smaller piece of business, down in drug, and up in all of the trade. Here's the same store analysis. The reason I'm looking at same stores, we're analyzing stores that carried the product for all 4 quarters that I'm showing here. So they had modern oral on their shelves in fourth quarter of 20 all the way through third quarter of 21. And what happened in those same stores? So what this does is it eliminates the increase in volume due to distribution builds, new stores adding the product. When we look at same store sales, we see in first quarter, it was up by 24%. Second quarter, up by 19%. Third quarter, up by 6%. Now, it's slowing, right? I think we need to continue to watch this. I would anticipate that growth rate will increase some in the future, but did slow a little bit this quarter. Gives us a little bit to watch here, but I don't think any big concern that we're seeing. Okay, what about all of the tobacco? Here's where I mentioned, now this is the most recent 13 weeks, most recent quarter, third quarter of 2021. Large cigars are down by 3%. First time I'm seeing that. And look at the gray bar, moist, as I mentioned, down by 6%. These two categories, very unusual to see this level of decline, very unusual. And we're starting to investigate this, and I do believe that it could be a supply or distribution issue. As an example, with large cigars, one of the top states for large cigars is Texas. They're actually up by 4 or 5%. Pennsylvania, one also of the largest states for sales of large cigars, is actually down by over 15%. So we're seeing quite a difference here, and that would suggest to me that it's a distribution supply issue. There's something going on that we've got to look into. But keep that in mind for the retailers in the audience. This is quite a change. Cigarillos, large cigars down by 3%, moist down by 6%, and you can see how all the other categories fared. Those growing, of course, are modern oral, vapor up by 9%, and then papers, tubes, wraps up by 3%. Okay. U.S. moist trends, this is interesting as well. Premium discount, deep discount, all declining, but you can see that deep discount is declining by less. First time I'm reporting this as well. Deep discount usually had been growing. So just as in cigarettes, consumers are moving to the deep discount segment of the category rather than the premium or discount segments. Here's vapor. Cartridges are up 6% in the most recent quarter. Disposables up very strong again, up by 21%. Keep in mind the size of the bar is the size of the business. The height of the bar is the size of the business. So you can see that disposable cartridges are far bigger than even disposables today, despite that growth rate. Interestingly, we would expect this to continue as well. Disposables will continue to grow. Cartridges are really coming back. I'll show you that in a minute. Let's look at the pandemic and what happened here as well. Now, the way to read this, the orange line represents the current month from January of 2020 through September of 2021. The gray bar represents the year ago period. So we can see as we went into the pandemic that cigarettes started to grow 3% in March of 20, 1%, 2%, 3% in the summer months of 2020. That's the reason we said it's hard to measure today because they're going against a very strong year. When we get out through, let's say, March of 21, we start to see, again, typical cigarette declines, and even greater more recently, just because of the height during the summer months of 2020. Large cigars, look at the story behind large cigars. What an incredible story in that they were growing very strongly through the entire time period of the pandemic. But most recently, we've seen some declines, -9% in July, -3% in September. We're keeping an eye on that, as I mentioned. Moist, you can see, again, like cigarettes, grew during the pandemic. That work from home really helped to improve consumption of both moist and cigarettes. Again, returning though to more normal negative patterns a little bit, and a little more strongly, even more recently in the past 3 months. Papers, tubes, wraps was a real success story for this past year and a half. So you can see that they grew every time period by double digits, quite significantly. They're slowing down as we come out of this. Interestingly enough, during this time period, we also track cannabis. Cannabis consumption was up during the pandemic period. So papers, tubes, wraps went right along with that. Vapor, as you can see, very negative as we went through February of 20 through about September, October, and look at the increases. Look at the significant increases and some growth in vapor that's quite significant, slowing down a little bit more recently, but still fairly strong. Little filtered cigars, not a good story here. Nothing at all the past year and a half, way behind their year ago levels. The reason being that we're seeing taxation has caught up with little filtered cigars, which really are smoked very similar to cigarettes, because that has removed a lot of the price advantage of little filtered cigars. And therefore, in many areas, there's not much of a price reason for choosing to smoke one, and they have not been growing. Modern oral, very strong, and look at the growth rates, 472% in January of 20, 495% in March of 20, and look at how it went up. You can see that it's starting to slow, still very high growth rates, but because distribution has caught up with it, where a lot of stores are currently carrying the product, and there's less distribution build in the numbers, you see that the growth rate is slowing, but still quite substantial. Here's snus. Snus was hurt by modern oral, and you can see the results there. Not really much growth at all during the pandemic period. And here's roll your own. We expected roll your own to maybe do pretty well as consumers were hit economically. I do think some of the stimulus checks bounced people from roll your own over to the pre-made cigarette, particularly in the deep discount category that we know is growing, but not good results behind roll your own. And pipe, very similar as well, even worse results. So pipe has been declining as well during this pandemic. And that's it, folks. That's just about 20, 25 minutes of sort of the current trends of the category. I'll take it back to Mary to get us on with the panel, and I think Tom is next.
Sure. Thank you, Don. That's always great information that you give. We appreciate it. I think we're going to have some time for questions at the end, so kind of keep your questions if you don't mind, and Chris will kind of facilitate that, I think, at the end. But let's move on to Tom Bryant and his tobacco legislative and regulatory update. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, everyone. I want to thank the TMA staff for inviting me to be a part of the panel discussion today. The first topic I'm going to cover is legislation in Congress that would increase excise tax rates. Now, during the current congressional session this year, Congress has been considering a budget reconciliation bill known as the Build Back Better legislation. The first version of this bill included increases in all federal cigarette and tobacco tax rates. The tax rates on cigarettes and small cigars was to double, up to $2.02 per pack. However, the latest version of the bill does not increase either of these two tax rates. Now, the proposed tax increase on large cigars has also been removed from the latest version of the bill, as have tax rates increases on moist snuff, chewing tobacco, and roll your own, and they were set to increase excessively, almost up to 2,000%. But again, those have all been removed from the bill. However, the bill still contains new taxes on modern oral nicotine products at a new rate. You see in the chart here, the first bill. That would have taxed modern oral nicotine at $100.66 per 1,000 units. The new version of the bill that was just released in late October now has a tax rate of up to $4.55 per can or package of 20 lozenges or nicotine pouches. And also, they've now set a tax rate for electronic cigarettes and nicotine vapor at $1.15 per pod of liquid nicotine solution. So as of now, those are the only two tobacco or vapor related tax rates that are in the Build Back Better legislation. Now, this bill is still being negotiated and it hasn't been voted on in Congress yet. As a part of the initial effort to oppose this bill when it was first introduced, NATO commissioned an economic impact study to study the impact on jobs, retail sales, and then tax revenue collections on the state level. And that study found that the impacts on a national level included $801 million in lost retail sales, more than 14,000 lost jobs across the retail and ancillary sectors of the economy, and $1.26 billion in state tax revenue lost. You may remember that President Biden indicated publicly several times that his new budget reconciliation bill would not raise taxes on anyone earning less than $400,000 per year. But what our study showed was that that would have a major impact with cigarette taxes, OTP tax increases, and again, almost all of those taxes have been removed from the bill. It doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet because this bill is still under consideration and can certainly be amended going forward. Switching to the FDA, on April 29th of this year, the Food and Drug Administration announced that the agency will propose what are known as product standards. Product standards would ban the use of menthol in cigarettes and ban all flavors in cigars. It is important to understand that the FDA has the authority to adopt these product standards without further congressional approval or action. A product standard is the power that Congress gave to the FDA to reduce or eliminate an ingredient in a tobacco product or constituent in tobacco smoke. Let me repeat that. It's the power to reduce or eliminate an ingredient in a tobacco product or a constituent in tobacco smoke. That's a very significant power because it can result in products actually being removed from the market, just like the FDA's proposal regarding banning menthol in cigarettes and flavors in cigars. Now, in its April announcement earlier this year, the FDA stated that it plans to issue this new proposed regulation sometime by April of 2022, next year. Moving on to another FDA matter, this is the FDA graphic cigarette health warnings topic. Congress authorized the FDA to require new graphic cigarette health warnings to be printed on cigarette packages and on cigarette advertisements. There are 11 graphic warnings, and then they are also accompanied by a text warning as well. Those were proposed by the FDA in March of 2020. However, 1 and 2 months later successively, 2 lawsuits were filed against the FDA seeking to overturn these new graphic cigarette health text warnings. Those 2 lawsuits are still pending. But based on court orders from those lawsuits, the implementation date of these new FDA warnings has now been pushed out to January 9th of 2023, more than a year from now, and the courts could certainly extend that even further. And these cases have not had what is called a hearing on the merits. So we have had no final decision by these 2 courts yet on whether these new graphic cigarette warnings are constitutional and can go into effect. The 2 pictures you see on the slides are actual FDA mock-ups showing the new graphic warnings, how they look on a pack of cigarettes and how they look in a magazine advertisement. On cigarette packs, the warnings need to cover the top half of both the front and back of each cigarette package. For cigarette advertisements, the warnings need to cover at least 20% of the top part of a cigarette ad. The next FDA topic is pre-market tobacco application review metrics. Regarding these PMTAs, as we call them, the FDA received 15,020 PMTA applications by the September 9, 2020 filing deadline. This includes applications for most categories of products, but as you can see by the chart, the vast majority were for e-cigarette and vapor products. Now, this chart doesn't show the number of applications, but the number of products covered by those applications. And as you can see, e-cigarettes and vapor had 6,900,000 plus products covered by those 15,000 applications, and then a significant less number for each of the other categories from cigarettes down to smokeless. However, look at the third column that's in red on the right-hand side. There are three acronyms in that first box. RTA means the FDA refused to accept a PMTA application. RTF means the agency refused to file a PMTA application. And EID means that an environmental impact report deficiency was discovered and the application was rejected for that purpose. Now, the FDA has issued RTAs, RTFs, and EID letters to manufacturers covering 5,773,202 e-cigarette and vapor products, which means these products needed to be removed from the market because they didn't follow the guidelines for the PMTA applications. Now, the FDA has also issued what are called marketing denial orders, what we refer to as MDOs, in response to PMTAs, which means the products must also be removed from the market. In other words, the FDA reviewed the application in its entirety and determined that they did not meet the standard that the product was appropriate for the protection of the public health. Now, as of the most recent FDA actions taken through November 8th of 2021, just last week, marketing denial orders were issued to 260 different manufacturers that filed PMTAs for electronic cigarette and nicotine products. Those MDOs covered an additional 1,167,000 flavored electronic cigarette products. So when you add the MDO orders with the RTA, RTF, and EID denials, you're well over 6 million and closing in on almost 7 million e-cigarettes and vapor products that have not been approved by the FDA. However, after the FDA issued a number of these MDO orders, a growing number of companies that received an MDO denying the sale of their electronic cigarette or vapor products have either sued the agency or requested a stay of the MDO. In the case of some of these MDOs, the FDA staff initially determined that certain required documents for a PMTA were not filed. However, after further agency review, the FDA determined that yes, all elements of a PMTA were submitted by some of these companies that received MDOs. And then the FDA proceeded to either rescind those MDOs where all of the elements were there, and they moved those products back into the substantive review process. So they've been put back in line to be further reviewed. This slide shows the 10 companies who have either sued the FDA, seeking a rescission of an MDO that they received, and the FDA has actually rescinded it, or the FDA on its own has stayed enforcement of an MDO because they found that yes, the company did provide all of the documentation that they were supposed to when they submitted the PMTA in September of 2020. So those are 10 companies. Now we are waiting for the FDA to make additional decisions, either granting PMTAs or issuing MDOs. They've covered about 98% of all pending applications, but there are 2% of applications still under review by the agency. Moving on to the next topic, it's corrective statements. It's a litigation matter. In 1999, some 22 years ago, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against the major cigarette manufacturers. As a part of that lawsuit, in 2006, a federal district court ruled that the manufacturers had to publish what are known as corrective statements on TV, in major newspapers, and in on-cert brochures attached to cigarette packs at retail stores. This court order also required each of the manufacturers to display a sign that would be 18 inches wide by 30 inches high on retail store counters that contain the corrective statements. However, that part of the decision was appealed, and the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals overturned this retail sign requirement. Then the Department of Justice came back with a second retail signage proposal for stores that are under a promotional contract with these manufacturers. And this second DOJ proposal now requires Altria, Philip Morris USA, RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company, and ITG brands to display on a rotating basis for at least 2 years 18 different point of sale signs with these different corrective statement messages in stores. And the signs must cover 25% of the area of point of sale cigarette displays for each such manufacturer. So on the back bar of a convenience store, 25% of the area advertised with packs or other advertisements for these brands of cigarettes need to be covered by these signs. And this DOJ remedy has these manufacturers displaying the 18 signs on a rotating basis, as I indicated, for up to 2 years. This slide shows an example of one of the DOJ corrective statement signs and how it would be fixed to a back bar cigarette display. Note the size of the sign. It covers more than 2 full rows of cigarette packs, and you would have multiples of those signs covering the back bar. Now, each of those major manufacturers, along with NATO and NACS, are opposing this new 18 signage requirement proposed by the DOJ. From a retailer's point of view, this requirement is certainly unfair and unconstitutional because retailers were never part of this original DOJ lawsuit. We've never been a party. Moreover, retailers did not make the statements decades ago that now the courts and the DOJ want corrected. All of this is leading up to what is called an evidentiary hearing, which is like a trial, scheduled for the summer of 2022 to determine whether these 18 new messages need to be displayed in retail stores. Moving on to state tobacco legislation. I'm going to give just a brief overview of state tobacco bills. This slide shows those states that had bills introduced and or acted upon this year that would increase cigarette or tobacco tax rates. The states in red had tax bills defeated by a committee vote, or they missed a committee deadline, or a floor vote in the state house or state senate. The states in yellow have bills still pending if the legislature is still in session, which is only a few legislatures, or those states in yellow have bills carry over to the 2022 state legislative session if they were not acted upon in the 2021 session. For flavor bans, this slide shows the states that had bills that would ban virtually all flavored tobacco products. Again, those in red had the bills defeated or they did not make committee deadlines, but those in yellow would carry over to 2022's state legislative session. Just given the number of states here that we see in either red or yellow, it's evident the trend of more states is one that would be considering banning all flavored tobacco products. And that includes menthol cigarettes, mint and wintergreen smokeless, flavored cigars, virtually all pipe tobacco, because all pipe tobacco is flavored, and then flavored vapor as well. On a local level, since 2012, NATO has been monitoring and opposing local tobacco ordinances. To get a sense of how many states have had cities or counties consider local restrictions on tobacco products, this slide shows those states in red where local ordinances have been considered over those past 9 years. Currently, the most active states for local ordinances are California, Colorado, Minnesota, Oregon, and Virginia. But an important study was released in May of this year by the Yale School of Public Health, and it looked at the impact of the San Francisco total flavor ban ordinance on cigarette smoking rates by San Francisco high school students. In the study, high school smoking rates were compared for 8 school districts, with San Francisco School District being the only district where a total flavor sales ban was actually enacted. The study found that San Francisco high school student smoking rates increased from 4.7% in 2017, the year before the adoption of the ordinance, and they increased to 6.2% in 2019, 1 year after the ban was enacted. This is a 32% increase in high school smoking rates. What the study concluded was this, and this is the message I'm leaving this audience with, is that young people and young adults reverted back to cigarette smoking when all other flavored tobacco products were banned. And that creates a new public health problem for those that want to ban flavored tobacco products. Mary, that's the end of my session. I'll give the screen back to you folks. And if there's any questions after Amanda speaks, I'll be glad to answer those.
Okay, great. So Amanda, I'm going to just kind of turn it over to you because I think, kind of based on what Don presented to us from the, what's being sold at stores, and certainly obviously vapor and those products are kind of your expertise and what you're looking at. And then what Tom talked about with legislative issues on those products, I guess we're just kind of open to, what are your comments as both a retailer and also an executive director and president of a large association? What do you have to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mary, and thanks to everyone at TMA for having me here today. Yeah, I've got some remarks prepared that cover a wide variety of these things. I think Don's presentation was very informative and echoes a lot of the trends that we're seeing at the shop level in the vapor side of the industry. And, I want to address some of the problems that we're seeing with a lot of what Tom covered in his presentation and how that's affecting the retailers downstream, particularly in the vapor sector, which is really the only area I can speak to with expertise. But as I thought about how to concisely describe the regulatory impact that vaping has endured in recent months, I realized it's sometimes tough to summarize a catastrophe. It would be like asking the captain of the Hindenburg blimp which factor was the worst, the lightning, the explosion, or the gravity. The tragic reality here is that vaping is suffering through a multi-pronged attack from the executive branch, from Congress, and from self-perpetuating activist groups, also from the deep-pocketed donors that bankroll them. Each of those parties are being actively cheered on by an irresponsible news media that has cravenly ignored its public duty to treat issues of scientific importance and policy with balance and skepticism. The most recent assaults in this policy battle have been the FDA's sweeping market denial orders, the Postal Service ban on shipping vape products, and the gargantuan tax proposed on vaping products in Congress. From a business and retailing point of view, the results are just what you might expect. A slow implosion of the entire sector, collapse of investor and consumer confidence, and desperate efforts to seek a legal remedy. Stores are being shuttered, employees are being laid off, investments are being wiped out, and thousands of entrepreneurs and small business owners are watching their hard work and their dreams disintegrate. At the same time, there are very troubling signs of emerging gray and black markets. Again, this comes as no surprise. Black markets are the inevitable and entirely predictable result of this kind of draconian prohibition. Retailers and consumers are being driven to both disposables and synthetics. Sellers are trying to offload inventory in any rapid way they can. There are indications of products being falsely labeled as synthetic. Nearly all of those emerging products are manufactured abroad. There are now counterfeit suppliers of base synthetic from China that in reality is just tobacco-derived nicotine that is being falsely labeled. All those dynamics are bad already and nearly certain to get worse. But looking at this in terms of macro trends or purely empirical measures misses a crucial dimension. I want to emphasize what this all means in human terms in the consequences for ordinary Americans. Over the past several months, I've heard from countless customers who are utterly panicked about seeing vaping stripped away from them. These are decent, law-abiding Americans from all backgrounds who rely on vaping products in a valiant effort to quit smoking. Many of them are low and middle income, and they live on fixed budgets. Lots of them are recovering from smoking-related illnesses, and every last one of them is now living under a cloud of dread that they or their loved ones will be corralled back to smoking cigarettes. But you won't read their stories in the New York Times, they don't get interviewed by NPR, no one invites them to testify on Capitol Hill. The NGOs have open contempt for vapors, and the bureaucrats in Washington obviously could not care less if folks like that are left out in the cold. By every estimate, that's more than 15 million of our fellow Americans. However, we don't know the precise figure because the Center for Disease Control intentionally excludes that crucial measurement from its tobacco survey. That is horribly negligent, so I want to say it again. The exact number of Americans that are quitting smoking by vaping is the single most important statistic in this public health discussion, and yet federal health authorities are willfully refusing to examine it. There has been almost zero political accountability for these disastrous policies, but those millions of vapers are also voters, so I'm hopeful that they will soon be taking those officials to the electoral woodshed. But beyond the political reckoning, there is a more important factor, and that's moral accountability. What the FDA and the prohibition activists are doing is unethical. It is flat wrong by any moral compass and plain common sense. Last week, a study sponsored by the NIH showed that the vaping tax alone would drive more than 2.5 million people who have quit smoking back to cigarettes. The FDA and its leadership, like Mr. Zeller, know that. Members of Congress that are pushing this tax know that. After all, it's their own colleagues warning them. The FDA also surely knows that its denial orders will undoubtedly have the same widespread effect. This is not some academic puzzle. It's plain as day to anyone who's watched this space. The FDA, prohibitionists in Congress, and egomaniacal activists like Michael Bloomberg are pushing policy outcomes that have a straight and direct correlation to millions of people returning to cigarettes. They are directly and personally responsible. There have been other moral panics in this country and other boneheaded prohibition policies that wreaked public havoc, and we look back on those in our national memory with rightful outrage. That's why someday the public figures who drove this latest misguided crusade deserve to be remembered in disgrace. The public health harm, the individual medical suffering, the economic destruction, and the shattered hopes, all of this is correctly laid at the doorstep of FDA and all of those who worked so obstinately for these policies. At a time when smoking rates were plummeting, they took actions to make it increase. When the single most effective smoking cessation method of all time was devised, they tried to crush it. When American entrepreneurs innovated an entirely new business sector to facilitate quitting, they strangled it. As evidence piled up by the bushel that vaping was vastly safer than smoking, they instead misled the public and explicitly aimed to frighten them. And even as their colleagues in the United Kingdom are actively helping its people use vaping to quit, our public health leaders are casting our own people into the wilderness and calling them outlaws. I'm sure you can sense my own outrage at the state of affairs in nicotine policy, and I hope that you share it. My group, the American Vapor Manufacturers Association, and our many members have tried in good faith to take part in public policy discussions and responsible regulation. We spent countless time and scarce finances to embark through FDA's steeplechase approval process, which turns out to have been rigged from the very start, as recent fatal flaw memos have shown. But there's more at stake here than market shares and empirical business trends. Real people are having their lives and their health upended. We find ourselves at a policy crossroads where Americans are free to purchase and use flavored alcohol, cigarettes and cigars in abundant variety, countless types of marijuana, opioids, and sedatives, although all of those products cause widespread injury and death. And yet nicotine vaping, which in the whole of medical literature has not caused a single death, is being outlawed. When our freedom and individual autonomy is taken from us, and with a hypocrisy that is brazen, it is a violation that ought to offend us all. And what I would say on that furthermore is that one of the things that's been really sad to see, I own 6 vape retail outlets myself. I started my business as a former smoker who was very passionate to quit and help other people in my community quit. The situation that we're seeing now between shipping bans, denial orders, taxes, what's happening, people who started these businesses with a very specific agenda to help smokers get off cigarettes are now being forced to sell all manner of things just to keep the doors open. Some of those are things that are very helpful to other types of tobacco users, like oral pouches. I think that's something that a lot of vape shops are starting to carry. And that's something that is in line with what we're trying to do with vaping, is help people get on a less harmful product. But now you see people starting to carry cannabis accessories, hookah accessories, all sorts of things. There's been a huge rise in disposables, which I don't think accomplishes any of the goals that FDA, Congress, any of these NGOs want to attain. When you make it impossible for someone to do business in a legitimate category, you drive them to do business in other ways. And that's been the main theme that I've seen over the last half year. I don't think vape shops and vape retail is going away. Vape shops and vape retail is adapting. And some of it has been for the better, and some of it has been out of necessity. But as everyone says, I would say watch this space, because certainly there is a lot going on in the small business sector right now.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think I couldn't agree with you more. It makes me so sad to see working on local issues with, hand in hand with vape shop owners, and to see literally small businesses go out of business and be legislated out of business is appalling to me. They're legal products that they were selling, And because, you know, certain local councils or maybe state legislatures have made decisions that they're not even educated on, by the way, as you mentioned, they can put someone out of business, and it really is appalling. And it's interesting what you said about, you know, I think Americans are really good at adapting. That's why, you know, we're capitalists, and that's why you see the different styles of vape e-cigs come out. When one is banned by the government, they have other ways to make these products. And, you know, as a tobacco store owner and having 181 stores, we've had to adapt over the years continually, you know, and since 1994, when we really got into the tobacco store industry, we went from being a cigarette store, if you will, to all of a sudden we have, you know, cigar stores, we have lounges, we have tobacco and liquor store combinations. We have all kinds of different layouts and styles of stores to fit the markets that we're in. And as you can see with the plethora of nicotine products that Dawn showed us today that are being sold in all kinds of different stores, whether it be in convenience, tobacco store, vape stores, mass merchants, and drug stores, I think that you're just going to continue to see our specialty stores, whether it be just vape or tobacco stores, continue to grow, because we can be all things to all nicotine users at some point. And you know, convenience, as big as they are, they're not going to have that opportunity to actually teach people, I think, about these new products and why they might be a little bit better for you. And as you know, listening to the panel before us, my goodness, I mean, they might as well be a scientific panel, and they're all tobacco manufacturers. And but every single one of them is a scientist or an attorney or, you know, whatever. And I guess my question to them, and my sort of almost a challenge to them, is how are you going to bring these new products to market and make it so that we can teach our people in the stores how to sell it? And, you know, what are they allowed to say? What are they not allowed to say? And how are we going to move these new products as they come to market to the end user? And how are you going to help us to teach our people to do that? And I would give an applaud to Swedish Match and the work they did on Zyn, and the work they did on actually educating store clerks and, you know, teams of companies on how to sell that product. They did a really good job. I think we had some of that in vape, but we've also missed some of that, in my opinion. But with that all being said, maybe Chris might want to hop back on and see what we want to do next. I know we're a little late, but I'm sure that Tom, Don, or Amanda would be happy to take questions. Chris, if you have any from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you all very much. These were very, very interesting and eye-opening presentations, each one of you. There's a lot going on right now in the world, in our world, in our stakeholder world, and it's reassuring to sit and listen to folks who have really their hand on the pulse, so to speak. Don, I have a question for you about the data and trends that you're seeing. There were some questions about the forecasting. One of the questions was whether or not you were taking into account with that vape, some of the vape forward-looking guidance that you were giving, or forward-looking estimates that you had there. Does that take into account the MDO decisions and what's happening in the in the flavored space, or is that looking more at kind of the straight up market trends on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So no, it's really looking at the straight up market trends. So it was not taken, and because it would be so hard to predict what will happen with any of the MDOs or anything, just as Tom mentioned, it doesn't take that into account. It's really just looking at marketplace trends. And one of the biggest ones is that during the pandemic, a lot of consumers that were in vape went back to combustibles because they could use them more frequently at home. We expect, as we looked at our projection for vape, that that would change back, that as people returned to work and had more workplace restrictions, that those people that used to vape would likely go back to vape. And that was really one of the major factors that went into it. It was all marketplace considerations. It's a good question.
Yeah. Do you have anything to look at the difference in the visible? Because I think one thing that maybe to explain is the visible, and maybe this is a question for Don and Amanda. And Amanda, I know I'm putting you on the spot as a spokesperson for the vape shop industry, but the relative size of the market, I think that's one of the hardest things when we talk about ends products. It's one of the hardest things to kind of get your head around, because you have a large part of this market going through a very visible, if I may use the word universe, a very visible universe, a universe that's available through Management Science Associates or visible in Nielsen and other sources. And then you have the part of it that's more of the vape shop part that is a little, or has traditionally been less visible, mainly because structurally vape shops were dealing directly with manufacturers and sourcing their product in that way, but it wasn't a side of the universe that was typically kind of going into the traditional wholesale channel and doing the scan data and stuff. So I guess one of the questions is between the two of you, do we have an accurate picture of what the total size of this universe, and I hate to use the term, but I think with the MDO decisions really have to start thinking about that, was in terms of at its apex before those decisions were out, and then what we think it might look like at least going forward in terms of relative size. It's a tough question. I don't expect you to have a concrete answer, so.
I'll give you my answer, and then Amanda, you can go ahead and comment as well. But no, it's very difficult to figure out the total size of the vape category today. It's difficult because, as you mentioned, I can track the major classes of trade and what vape items are being sold in the traditional classes of trade that are serviced by the typical candy and tobacco distributor, because that's how we collect data. We also collect scan data, and we can do that way as well. But vape shops are typically underrepresented within that sample because a lot of vape shops purchase directly from an online distributor or directly from the manufacturer, and therefore in this data set would not be counted. So likely I am understating the total size of the vape category in the US, because you do have to take into account the vape shops. And today it's a lot of CBD shops are also selling vape and CBD. So there's a lot more shops that are beginning to sell vape that are not counted by the traditional ways of collecting data. And so no, it is understated, and it is very difficult to get an idea.
Yeah, I would agree with Don. It's very hard to get accurate economic numbers on our sector of the industry, just because we do use very different distribution networks, and there is a lot of direct from the manufacturer purchasing that goes on. The best estimate that we had came from 2018, when we estimated there were about 14,000 vape shops in the United States, but that's very outdated data at this point.
So Amanda, just to follow up on that, with what's happened with a lot of these decisions on the flavored products, what's the future for the vape shop? I know you talked about branching into other products and things like that, but what's really the future for that mass? You said it was outdated, 14,000. Maybe it's a little bit higher, or at least it was up until September. What's kind of your sense of where that's going directionally?
It's going a few places, but it's not going down. It's sort of shifting, if that makes sense. A lot of smaller single location or very few location businesses are selling their locations to larger chains. A lot of established vape retail is in a transition to a hybrid shop model, where that would be half vape shop, half smoke shop type of situation. And I would say that captures most of it. I've seen very few businesses close down entirely, but most are in a state of change right now and adaptation.
Okay. just looking at this. As I guess a follow-up to the follow-up. These the transition, and especially going kind of to half vape, half tobacco and such. What's the biggest issue there from your perspective in terms of the messaging and things that sends? You know, the manufacturer panel talked about the regulatory process is incentivizing combustion because it's the business reality, right? Manufacturers are saying it's a lot easier to get an SE product through. A, it can be more predictable. B, it's, you know, the investment, especially for mid-sized manufacturers. So I think, you know, a lot of people think, oh, a manufacturer, that you look at it as a monolith, but there's a lot of manufacturers that don't have a lot of money to put towards, you know, big product development either. So for your sector, you're doing things to survive and to keep it going. But in the transition to the kind of half vape, half tobacco model, that hybrid model, or into the CBD and other things, it's obviously kind of a challenge. And I know you touched on it in your talk, but what's kind of the thought process that goes into that? I just want to give people on this kind of a sense of the thought process and how vape shops have to adapt to that. So if you can kind of give a little bit of color to that transition that's happening, and what's kind of the thinking going behind it, and the assumptions that are being made, just so that people understand what it's like for these businesses.
Yeah, well, so we're talking about businesses who for many, many years, their primary product category was open systems e-liquid. And as Don showed in his slides, those numbers are certainly on the decline. And that
I think we lost Amanda.
We lost your audio, Amanda.
Yeah.
No audio. Time. Okay. I'm going to go to Tom while Amanda sorts the earbud out. We'll have our technical person in contact with you. So Tom,
that in his research, they're on the decline in those dedicated vape shops that used to be their primary product. Much of them now, due to the PMTA process.
Okay, that transmitted from the. Do you have, maybe go to computer audio? It might be your earbuds are out of battery. I don't know.
No, they're fine. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. Now you're good. Now you're good. Sorry, could you say that again? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think I was just having spotty internet. One of the things that we're seeing going on is manufacturers are not producing open systems e-liquid, or spending time on developing those products because the process through PMTA is so hard. Those products are primarily made by smaller companies, not by the big five, not by companies that really have double-digit millions to put into a PMTA. A lot of our manufacturers spent a significant amount of money on PMTA, but not nearly that bar that was set by some of those top 5 manufacturers. And some of those people that you used to see making open systems e-liquid are now moving over to producing disposables and those types of products because of what's been happening with the FDA. And that just carries on downstream through retail.
Downstream to retail, so it's going to be the shift for that. Tom, your economic analysis, and I know that at TMA we took a stab at it ourselves to kind of look at the where you can predict, and there's a lot of variables in it. The bottom line, though, in terms of the FET, increase on top of everything else that's happened, what did your analysis say about that? Was this kind of the proverbial straw on the camel's back in terms of it really breaking things? Because you have, especially, and I know that in NATO, you're more of a tobacco focus, but obviously in the vape space, you also have the post office decisions and things like that. There was a lot happening. When you did your analysis, though, what was this a cumulative thing, or was this really just a straight up price shock from that happening on there? Can you just give us a little bit more insight into what was kind of emerging from the data as you were doing your analysis on the FET increases?
Certainly, Chris, it was more cumulative. It goes year to year. The significant tax increases are so large, like up to 2,000% on some of the chewing tobacco, moist snuff, etc., that it would force people to either go to the illicit market to avoid all taxes whatsoever, or to switch to less expensive alternatives. Even the vapor taxes are going to do that. It was a major shift, and you saw that with the state tax revenue, 1.26 billion per year lost in state tax revenue. So that's got to go someplace, but it's really a major decline in use across the board, or a shift to illicit market. There are illicit markets for cigarettes and OTP and vape across the country. We believe those would really expand to fill the demand that would otherwise be there. At a much lower price. I remember the gray market cigarettes some 10, 12 years ago that went offshore and came back in, that were destined for sale in foreign countries, but not the US, but a much less expensive alternative, and those flooded the market for a while. We see the same kind of thing possibly happening again, is products destined for foreign markets coming back in, or illicit markets, criminals who want to take advantage of this situation and supply a demand that's not going to go away. Yes, cigarettes are declining slightly, but there's still a significant demand for combustibles, and then OTP, and then vape. And we see all of that declining or going to illicit market. And that's the real problem. You increase crime, you increase everything. We've seen it now with store robberies, store break-ins that are going after the tobacco products. That we see will only increase. So it's a cumulative effect. It's not just demand goes down, it's illicit markets, it's crime, it's foreign products coming back in. So it just really compounds itself in a number of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. On the subject of illicit markets, and I guess Tom, Mary, and Amanda here, we at TMA we hear a lot about the frustration on the deprioritization of some of the enforcement efforts that come in for the illicit market, but with a potential for an excise tax increase on top of everything else, what's got you up at night as store owners and someone, Tom, that represents thousands of store owners across the country? What's got you up at night regarding illicit trade?
Mary, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. Well, the safety, I mean, as Tom touched on, the safety of our employees. Literally, in Colorado, we just experienced at the beginning of the year a state excise tax increase that was very large. And we immediately have had some break-ins where they have literally driven into stores with a truck, with a winch, right through our front windows, and just load cartons of cigarettes. They obviously kind of know what they want, because they know what they can turn around and resell, and back out, and they're out before as the alarm is going off. I mean, and the amount of money that costs to fix that. We've also had right in the daylight, either at gunpoint or at knife point, armed robberies. Same way, with just a trash bag, and they just jump over the counter. One guy holds, our manager or our team member at bay with a weapon, and literally they just take a trash bag and it's always cigarettes. Typically, they might grab this or that of other things to use for themselves. But so, really the health and welfare of our team members out there on the front line. And right now, as everyone knows, it's not easy to get people to work in stores, so then if you have, someone that's read about, oh, well, Smoker Friendly was robbed at knife point, they're not super excited about coming in and filling out an application. So that really, and I know that keeps my brothers up at night as well. It's probably one of the scariest things, because, the safety and well-being of our people are first and foremost for us coming through a pandemic. I mean, knock on wood, we got through it, and I'm not going to say it was all perfect, but we didn't lose anybody. Our people really stepped up and worked hard, and now we have these armed robberies happening, or these drive-through things where, you know, our managers called out in the middle of the night, and it's really terrible, and that does keep us up at night.
Chris, from my perspective, one thing that really is concerning for not only NATO, but all of its retail members are these flavor bans, especially on the local level. When you ban all flavored tobacco products, you take, half or more of the products off the store shelves. All that does is cause consumers to shift their buying practices. They go elsewhere, across the city line to the next town, into the next county, etc. It doesn't solve a problem. In fact, we have 3 studies now that show, like the study I mentioned, when you ban all flavors, young adults and underage youth switch back to smoking combustible cigarettes. So the advocates for these flavor bans are actually creating a new public health problem, but they think they're going to prevent this. It doesn't happen. Youth rely on social sources for tobacco products. That's older siblings, friends, parents, even strangers. I've always said social sources that have been around as long as there have been teenagers. That's where teenagers get the product, whether it be liquor or it be tobacco. You're not going to solve the youth access issue until you solve social sources, and that takes a societal change. So just banning the product from a store, which is not selling to youth in the first place, we are not the source for those youth, isn't solving the problem. They think they're having a victory when in fact it's putting businesses out of business and really then increasing the illicit market or causing consumers to go elsewhere for the product. And it makes no financial or health sense when you look at these new studies that say you're only creating a new health problem by doing this.
Sure. Amanda, anything to add to that from the vape shop perspective on the illicit?
Yeah, absolutely. I have 2 primary concerns. One of them is really with the quality of the liquid and all of these no-name disposables coming in from China. I remember back when I started my business, there wasn't American-made e-liquid that was prevalent, and that was one of the big things what our industry did is we established really high-quality American-made e-liquid. And with all of these recent actions, this proliferation of disposables, these things come in, it's very unclear where they're coming from, who's making the liquid, what kind of standards the liquid is being made to. And I think that's really concerning, especially after some of the events of 2019. I'm also this is an old topic, but it's still a very, very relevant concern for those of us out there in the retail world. The states that have not adopted T21 as state law, where I live here in Arizona, we have a very major problem with that. It is not enforced on the state level, and there are very, very bad actors. You can sit outside of one of these places on a Saturday night in their parking lot and see more foot traffic than you have ever seen at a vape shop in your life. It is a steady mill, one after the other, no less than 6 people in there at any one time. As soon as one goes out, another goes in, and none of these people are 21 years old, but these businesses are selling the products because they know there's not going to be any enforcement. The FDA is not coming to monitor what's going on with 21 in the states right now, and there's no enforcement from the state attorney general here, and so it's something that's happening a lot in states where we operate.
Yeah, that's quite surprising given the federal regulation on 21. From a policy perspective, with that reg out, you kind of think of it as a done issue since it raised, but actually, the enforcement side of it is with the states, and if the states aren't doing that enforcement, they're not going to do it. That's a very interesting point. So Don, any closing words? Because I think we're coming up on the end. We're a little bit over time with where we're at, and I know all of you are very busy people, and we greatly appreciate it. Don, you want to have any closing words on what you've been hearing?
No, Chris. One, I appreciate being here today. Happy to be participating in this panel discussion. My only closing would be, we're watching large cigars. That's been a strong growth factor. Let's see what happens with those. Moist was a little concerning with the downturn. We're looking at some supply, maybe some distribution type problems. And vape is doing well, and that should be watched. That's it.
All right, well, always informative from MSA, Don. We're very happy to have you here. Tom, always learn something from you as well. Thank you, and we're so appreciative of everything that NATO does for the industry, and we're very happy to work with you. Amanda, I believe this was your first TMA. I'm sorry it was virtual, but you're always welcome back. Your perspective is absolutely fantastic and a voice that needs to be heard, and we're happy to provide you with a platform. Mary, we'll see you again in March.
Thank you to TMA and to our whole group here. They made being a moderator super easy because they're really smart.
Thank you, Mary. You've done a wonderful job, and we really appreciate everything that Smoker Friendly does for the industry as well.
Well, we appreciate TMA, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, this concludes our programming for today. Tomorrow, and thank you very much to our panel. Tomorrow, we are starting at a slightly different time. We're going to make it a little bit easier for folks in Mary's time zone to catch up on this. Tomorrow, we're going to start off at 10:30 with a keynote from Dr. Matt Holman, the head of the FDA Office of Science. Dr. Holman will then sit on the following panel, Early and Often, Navigating Your Path to Market. We'll have a break, hopefully at scheduled time without any technical issues that we had from today. And then we'll conclude with connecting the US and global trends on an international look at some of the trends that we've been talking about here. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. I'd like to thank Director Zeller for taking the time to speak with us and have some Q&A with us. I'd like to thank Brittany Cushman from Turning Point, Beth Oliva from Fox Rothschild, Brian Urkula from Swedish Match, John Pritchard from 22nd Century, and our moderator on the previous panel, Jim Solis from JMS Scientific Engagement. I am Chris Greer, President and CEO of TMA. I'm thanking all of you for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And there's one final person that I would like to thank who has been absolutely instrumental in all of this, and that is our head of member relations, Michelle Parisi. Michelle has been working overtime, dealing with panelists from multiple time zones and dealing with all these technical issues and getting all of you registered. She has done just an absolutely phenomenal job and really deserves a special mention. And we're so appreciative of all of her work. So thank you, Michelle. Thank you to everyone. This was TMA 2021. I will see you tomorrow, 10:30 Eastern. Thank you.